Welcome to the Good Mood Show. I'm your host, Matt O'Neill. Be sure to hit subscribe so that you get a good mood every single week. Today, we are talking with Cory Rosenke. He is an author, a pastor, and a tenacious pursuer of the truth. Cory is the foremost authority on the cravings of the soul. And in his upcoming book, The Magnetic Heart of God, Cory describes in detail the 5 cravings of our soul. And in today's episode, we're going to learn what those 5 cravings are and go into a deeper understanding of how you can start to fulfill them in your life now. I am so excited for this conversation. Cory, welcome to the Good Mood Show.
Hey, thank you so much for allowing me to come. It's a great privilege to be here.
Yeah, well, this topic just grabbed me, the 5 cravings of the soul. And I just want to dive into it. You know, the first craving that you describe is this craving for security.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all want to feel safe, and yet sometimes we don't feel safe. The world can be really scary.
Yeah.
You know, we can see the news and see that people are getting hurt, and we can lose people in our life and all of a sudden not feel safe anymore, or get a diagnosis and not feel safe. How can we feel safe in this scary world?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you asking that question because we live in a scary world that is obsessed with the cravings of the body and the brain, right? That it seems like our whole culture is bent around satisfying, the needs of your body and the needs of your brain. And I think one of the reasons why we have such an advanced technological society and we have such an educated society, and yet basically every study shows that we are more unhappy, more fearful, more discontent, more confused than ever, right? Is because we haven't looked deep enough in the question you just asked. We haven't looked deep enough because we've come to view ourselves as merely biological beings, right? And if all we are is a biological being, then every point of security I'm looking for, or whatever craving I'm looking for, I'm looking to satisfy psychologically and physically. And yet our society is unhappy. I mean, all you have to do is look out the window to see it. You don't even need to have a study or test show you that. We've all seen it. And so the secret, I think, first off, is to understand how deep the craving for security is, right? It's not merely a physical craving. It's not merely about having a tall wall or a locked door, right? When I talk about the craving for security, I really break it down into 2 parts. The craving for physical security, yes, but then relational security, right? We need to know that we are physically safe, but we also need to know that our hearts are safe in the hands of those who hold them. And so it's important that we know what we're looking for when we talk about any kind of craving, specifically when it comes to the cravings of the soul. And so, yeah, when we're looking, the reason I called the book The Magnetic Heart of God, Understanding the 5 Cravings of the Soul, is because I explore each of these cravings on a psychological level, on a social level, and then, of course, on a deeper spiritual level. And I called the book The Magnetic Heart of God because at the end of the day, I believe that we are created to live in connection with our Maker. And as long as if we are disconnected from our Maker and simply looking for security in higher walls, then we can build a wall to a certain height, and yet it doesn't take very long and we realize we don't feel secure. So we got to build it higher, and we got to build it thicker. And there's no wall that's high enough. There's no relationship that's connected enough. Because we are looking to satisfy a craving that is not merely a biological craving. It is a non-biological craving. And so it cannot merely be satisfied in biological things.
Yeah, right. Because we're all going to die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And everyone we know is going to die.
Yeah.
And if we don't figure out that we are a soul that is having this human experience, that's a really, really scary reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how can we create this connection with our Creator and find joy being here while scary things happen?
Right. Well, for me, I can tell you that I remember very much for me sitting in a little office that I had. I was in my mid-20s, and ever since I was little, I've been in pursuit of education and knowledge. And I've always wanted to know things, ever since I was very, very small. And part of it was I grew up in poverty, and that was kind of my avenue of escape. Some other people in my situation, turn to drugs or turn to some sort of rebellion. I was fortunate enough by, no wisdom of my own, that my escape was in reading, and trying to gain knowledge. And I remember, so I from a very young age, I was reading Aristotle and Plato, and even some of the works of Freud. And it just, like 10 and 11 years old, that was my escape. Those are what I dug into. And so I read all these philosophical books my whole life. And then I remember, like I said, in my mid-20s, I was sitting in my office reading the Iliad by Homer for what must, probably the sixth time. And it's an interesting book. So I'm sitting there reading about you got Greek mythology, and so you have the Greeks, and you have the Trojans, and there are certain gods that are on the side of the Greeks, and there are certain gods that are on the side of the Trojans, and there's just this conflict, and people, even in heaven, in the gods, they're stabbing each other in the back, they're having affairs, they're switching sides, they're two-faced. It's just kind of this whole chaotic thing taking place. And I remember I had a moment where I sat up and I said, God isn't like this.
No way.
And
Absolutely.
I thought, and so the thing, if God isn't like this, then who is he? Right. And so for me, that was the first step of saying, okay, well, then who is he? Right. And for myself, I'm very thankful that I was led to a church filled with really kind, good people, who were patient with me, who asked my questions, who put up with my arguments,
Yeah.
right, and who were just very kind to reveal truth to me, right, and let me struggle with it, and let me, especially with certain things that I had believed contrary to, and so, but that moment in that room of wondering who is God, who is our maker, what is this all about, right, propelled me to want to know. And so for most people, I would say, if you want to get to that place where your security is not simply based on how strong your lock is, or on how high your walls are, right, or on how secure your relationship with the people around you are, it really needs to be in connection with your maker. So I'd say the first step is to ask who he is, and then go on a journey to find out, right? So yeah, I'd say that's step one.
Yeah. And a lot of people have religious trauma,
Mm-hmm.
get very triggered by this idea because maybe they were taught a version of God that isn't the truth.
Right.
I was certainly one of those people.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that God was here to punish me for everything I did wrong.
Right.
And so then I was afraid of him. And
Right.
then I just rebelled and said, well, this isn't what I want. I don't need another person telling me I'm not good enough.
Right.
And then coming back in my later life to rediscover my connection with God and seeing that, no, I had it wrong. The people who had taught me that he was always out to make me feel guilty and not good enough, they were just projecting their own stuff onto me. And that
Right.
God was always accepting me, always there loving me, always wanting my highest, most peaceful, most joyful life for me, and never wanting me to suffer in sorrow, maybe wanting me to learn from my mistakes,
Right.
but not wanting to judge me and shove my nose in it like I'm
Right.
a dog or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to have some people who were patient with me as I
Mm-hmm.
came around to this discovery. So how would the person listening who maybe doesn't have that connection or understanding that God just loves them and accepts them for everything they've done and will do no matter what, how would they find that?
Right. Well, for me, I found that in Jesus. That's what I believe. The reason that I'm a Christian is because for me, Christianity is not a God saying saying you're not good enough. It's a God saying, you know what, I'm enough. Right. And so I can have that. I have hope and joy and peace because I know a God who loves me, and who cares for me, and who is working for my best, and who corrects me at times, right? But not as an angry tyrant, but as a loving father, right? Who wants the best for me. And so for me, I would say, yeah, if you want this, you need to press into God. But as you mentioned, when we're talking about the soul, I've identified this security as a soul craving. And the reason I've identified it as a soul craving is, if as we go through these cravings, you're going to find that all of them, well, the first four definitely are strongly rooted in psychology. You'll find psychological textbooks. all sorts of academic papers written on these topics. And oftentimes they're assigned to be psychological topics. But these are non-biological cravings when you get down to it. That's why I'm assigning them as soul cravings. They aren't just the cravings of a mind, right? They are non-biological. They make no sense, actually, when you think of them in a biological context, right? Specifically, I mean, the craving to feel physically safe, that makes sense in a biological context. But our need to be accepted and affirmed, right, by the people around us, that goes much deeper, right? And so yeah, if you want to satisfy a non-biological craving, you're going to have to look towards the non-biological.
Yeah, and this is the Good Mood Show, and as we were discussing before we got on, we're not going to conquer our bad moods of fear and anger and jealousy and pride without a connection with our Creator. They're always going to come back up. We're always going to feel afraid again. We're always going to feel angry that things didn't go our way, or maybe we lost someone we love, and not understand it unless we can see the bigger picture. And that's with the connection with our Creator.
When I love titles that make me think. And so when I saw the Good Mood Show, I loved it because right away it made me engage me and made me think, because what is mood and what is good? I was thinking to start with, because if we're just talking about mood, I mean, mood is largely based. I mean, mood is not a psychological topic. It is a neuroscientific topic, right? Mood is directly related to brain and body chemicals. We could talk about, oxytocin and dopamine and all these things, and it can be adjusted by adjusting those chemicals. And so what is a good mood? Is a good mood simply the idea that feeling happy is better than feeling sad, so we call happiness good? I think that's the way a lot of people would interpret it, but
Sure.
I think they would reach a dead end at some point there.
You do.
But if a good mood is the right mood, is a mood that appropriately informs us of what's going on underneath and allows us to address it, right? And that's how I would interpret the name of your podcast. Even it's that
You nailed
appropriate
it.
mood. Yeah,
Cory, you nailed it. Absolutely. Yeah, there's we could have released dopamine all day long by using artificial substances and different things, but there's always a crash there.
Yeah.
The second craving you describe is the craving for identity.
Yeah.
Wanting to know, who am I? I was curious like you. Yeah. When I was a kid, I just wanted to know all the answers. I'm like, why are we here?
Yeah.
What's this all about? I don't understand it. None of this makes sense. The answers I'm being told also don't make sense.
Yeah.
So I just was on a quest to know as well, and have read many of the people you've read, not at age 12, but more in my 20s and 30s. But can you describe, what is this craving for identity and wanting to know?
Identity, again, is, we read about this in plenty of psychological textbooks, but it's deeper. It's non-biological. All of us are on the journey of identity. And I always say identity asks 4 symbiotic questions. Who am I? Why am I? What is my purpose? And do I have value? And we can have the highest walls in the world, but if we don't know who we are, we don't have peace. We cannot rest in a full place of happiness. And so the world, all of us are on this mission. Who am I? Why am I? Do I have value? What is my purpose? And I think that once again, it's a non-biological craving that we oftentimes are trying to satisfy in biological places. And that is why it is always so vulnerable, right? And so, I mean, oftentimes, we may pursue it in different ways. And one person is, when you think of why do young people join gangs?
Connection.
Yeah, exactly. It is for this place to say, hey, these people, I belong to this group of people. It's the place that I belong. I fit here, right? I generally say this: identity feels like home, and you will fight to protect your home, right? And so we are in search for identity, and it's also why the world is also trying to put their identity upon us. I mean, just think of advertising today. Virtually every commercial, they're not selling you a product. They're trying to say, hey, become part of us, because in becoming part of us, you will be safe, or you will be special. And so it's not just, hey, get this credit card. It's join our elite credit card club, right?
Right.
And even when you think of politics today, I mean, politics has become so polarized, and I think that a large part of the reason is because many of us have allowed it to become an identity. It's no longer about having a conversation about issues. It's identities bumping up against each other. And so we have to be very careful what we allow to become an identity in our life. It's
Mm.
fine to have all sorts of diverse preferences and all sorts of diverse leanings, but when we adopt something as an identity, right? As I said, it feels like home, and we will fight to protect it. And it's sad to see today how there are so many areas where we can't dialogue, where we need to dialogue because we have allowed something to become an identity, right? And so identity is something we all need, but we have to be careful what we allow to become an identity in our life.
Yeah, one of the ways that have triggered my mind here on identity, as you were just describing it, are a sense of our guiding values.
Mhm.
And I loved that time in the 90s when people had WWJD bracelets.
Yep, yep,
What would Jesus do? And so
yeah,
one of my favorite identities to take on is to be loving,
mhm,
to
yeah,
be accepting, to be compassionate. That's
yeah,
that's just a wonderful identity. And the answer to that question came out on a new bracelet that my wife got me for my birthday, and it's "He would love first."
yeah,
And
yeah,
I don't always have the capacity to love first
right,
because I'm not Jesus,
yep,
but he's a great example.
yep, yep,
The
amen.
next craving you describe is this craving for independence,
Mhm,
to feel like our own individual expression.
yeah.
Can you describe this craving?
Yeah, again, and I break this craving down into two halves. On the one hand of independence is this craving in mankind for freedom. And we've seen it all around us, right? We think of the great messages, or at least quotes that we think of, from Winston Churchill, right? They're all about, we will not be conquered, we will be free, right? And I think of, coming down now to the States, of course, we hear so much of the American presidents, and right, we will never let go of our freedom. There's this, we have this desire within us to hold on to our freedom, and it is deep, right? And the interesting thing about it is that it never seems to be enough. I mean, we live in a time of truly in a place of unprecedented freedom, right? And yet we keep wanting more and keep wanting more. Why? I would again say, because we are looking to satisfy a non-biological craving in the biological, right? But it's not just a craving for freedom. It is, as you pointed out, it's also that desire for distinct individuality, right? I need to know that I'm Cory, I'm not Matt, and as much as I like Matt, I'm different, and I want everyone to know that, right? There is this deep sense, even you when you see those rare identical twins, right, who seem to look the exact same, and they seem
Mhm.
to love getting the same haircuts and wearing the same shirts,
They do,
and
right?
yeah, at some point they will all come to the point where they need some differential. Maybe they're the academic twin, right? Maybe they're the twin who loves chocolate chip cookies while the other one prefers raisin cookies. They will need something that sets them apart, because if we don't, we feel redundant. We feel like there's no need for us.
Mm.
Um, and so our craving for, like I said, independence is so um loud in our society today, especially in the area of freedom, right? We get freedom, we no longer sooner get one freedom and we want another. It never satisfies, because again, I would say because we are looking to experience it in biological places when it is a non-biological craving.
Yeah, this was also one of my issues with religion early in my life,
Mhm,
was I felt like it was very restrictive.
mhm,
Like, hey, do this, don't do this, and I'm taking away your freedom.
mhm.
And as I grew to experience God later in life, I realized it was the exact opposite, that
Right,
He allowed unlimited freedom.
right,
Free choice is this huge gift
yeah,
that we were
yeah,
given.
right.
We can abuse it, and every time that we do, uh, I think He's loving us by teaching us that, hey, that feels bad.
Well, in my book, I talk about safe independence. right? Or safe freedom. And that is to say, Edmund Burke wrote a letter to those who were participating in the French Revolution a long time ago. So they're in the midst of the French Revolution. He says to them, he asks them this question. He says, what is freedom if not governed by virtue? Right. And then he answers his question. He says, the greatest of all possible evils. And his point being, our craving for freedom will ultimately propel us into disaster. Right? We want to push every boundary, push against every safety rail. We just want, and so I would agree with you in that, yeah, absolutely. I believe Jesus says it was for freedom, or the scripture says it was for freedom that I've set you free. And yet I believe that God has given us a beautiful framework that is designed to allow us to practice perfect freedom and safety. Because without those safety boundaries around us, we will fall into chaos, and so but of course we have this other thing inside of us that keeps us pushing against it, right? Always wanting more, always wanting more, always wanting more, and ultimately to our own destruction.
Well, if we go back to love, and my heart has become my guide.
Yeah.
I have this unlimited freedom. I can make any choice. Any choice. God's granted me this unlimited amount of freedom. But every time I make a non-virtuous, unwholesome choice, my heart feels a little constricted. Anytime I say a cruel word or make a judgment or do something that harms someone else, my heart closes just a little bit.
Yeah.
And anytime I make a loving choice, my heart expands. Anytime I'm kind or generous or helpful or lead somebody in a really positive way, anytime I'm doing those things, my heart expands. And I think that my heart has become my guide. And I think it's there for all of us. If God is communicating with us through the Holy Spirit every moment of the day, saying, hey, that's helpful.
Well, and that's why letting go of hatred, letting go of unforgiveness, letting go of any of those things does not just benefit the person hated or the person who isn't forgiven. It benefits you, because hatred destroys us. Unforgiveness destroys us, right? It is putting us in a prison that God doesn't want us to be in.
Yeah, well, my buddy Steve sent me a text one day with a picture and like a meme, and it said, when one forgives, two souls are set free.
Yeah.
And I just sat with that one. I'm like,
Yeah.
we think we're setting them free, but we're actually setting ourselves free.
Yeah.
When we forgive. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons of my lifetime has been that the only logical answer here is to forgive, regardless of how tough it was, how tough the decision was. One of the guests that we had on this show is a guy named Chris Singleton. And his mom was praying with her prayer group on a Wednesday night at church, and predominantly Black church, downtown Charleston. And a gunman walked into the church, sat down with them in their circle, and killed all 9 of them. And Chris came on the show, and he spoke of forgiveness. And now he travels the country speaking to students all over the world about how we're more alike than we are different, and how to find unity despite what appears to be differences. Yes, really, really powerful. This forgiveness, because he could have easily held on to hatred for the rest of his life.
Yeah, there's a movie that I just saw is just coming out. It's probably going to be a limited release, called The Hiding Place. And of course, those of you who know the story of Corrie ten Boom, right, who was in the extermination camps in World War II, right, and how her sister died there, and her leaving there and being on the quest of forgiving. And at one point, she even comes up in her life. She came up and she met the Nazi guard who had been the guard over the area of the camp and had been responsible for so much death. And I mean, it's an incredible story, of forgiveness in the most seemingly impossible circumstance.
Yeah, but there's no other choice.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm not saying what Chris has done is easy. I think he's 1 in a million to make the choice that he's made. But he made the high choice. He ultimately, that was a choice. I asked him how he did it. And I'm sure you'll appreciate this. He said, I didn't do it. Yeah. I prayed for God's help.
Well, and
God help me forgive.
yeah, and that is something that likely will be an ongoing miracle, right? Where he'll have to continue to keep, allow that miracle to work day by day, right?
Absolutely. So our next craving is this craving for significance.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Tony Robbins, and Tony has his 6 human needs, and significance is one of his 6 human needs he describes. Talk with me about how you see significance.
Yeah, significance is that that craving inside of us that doesn't just seek to be different, as in independence, but seeks to be above. We all have the need to feel special in some way. And the great thing is when managed appropriately, this craving is what has created beauty and art and architecture. I mean, imagine how boring the world would be if there wasn't a craving for significance to make something special, right? But of course, in the negative sense, when we manage it inappropriately, it's the very thing that makes me reach for the stars, but will be willing to step on your neck to get there.
Right.
Right. And so significance is that craving inside of us that needs and insists on knowing that we are special. And again, we look at the world around us and we see the rabid pursuit of this craving. And again, managed correctly, it creates beauty and goodness. Managed incorrectly, it propels us into all sorts of conflict. As I rather than reaching for security by hard work and by in fact reaching, I try to attain it by pushing you down. Right. And in pushing you down, I really haven't changed my position, but I now have convinced myself somehow that I am special because I have subjugated you. And so when I talk about these 5 cravings again, I believe they are the root of all human ambition. When we look at everything that has taken place in human history, we can boil it down to these 5 cravings: security, identity, independence. Of course, we're on significance right now. And so it is a powerful craving. And once again, it's never significant enough, as long as it is in the biological, right? I always say, I remember making $12 an hour, and I felt it wasn't enough, right? And so I thought, if I could make 15, I'll be able to get everything I want, and I'll make more than my friend. I'll be happy, right?
Yeah.
I remember this clearly. I made 15, and all of a sudden, oh, you know what I really need is 20. And then it was 25 and 30, and it's kept evolving throughout the years. As long as I am looking for it in the biological, right, it's never enough. And it also can always be taken away. As long as it isn't something biological, it can always be withdrawn, right? And so there goes my security. See, all these cravings are interconnected. Sometimes they're like a rainbow. It's hard to see where one begins and the other ends. And other times they're in conflict with each other, right? In the sense where I want to be significant so bad that I will do something that actually jeopardizes my security.
Sure.
Right. And so learning to manage these cravings together, that is the dance. And that is a life well lived is a life that, first off, looks for satisfaction for these cravings in the right places, right? But then is also aware and manages these cravings appropriately.
So I love this whole conversation because you can put your ladder up against the wrong wall. You can totally climb the wrong mountain. And I was climbing the wrong mountain of significance.
Yeah.
And it's, this exactly what you were describing. Hey, I need this amount of money.
Yeah.
Well, now this amount of money. And then, now this amount of money.
Yeah.
And I was climbing this mountain of significance, and it was also rooted in insecurity. I came from a pretty poor home when I was a child as well. And so I used to remember my mom and I would just like daydream about having a house with a pool, and a wraparound porch. And so I ended up getting a house with a wraparound porch and a pool, and yet it still wasn't enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I woke up to it.
I have a chapter in my book. It's funny you bring it up. It's called The Mountaintop. And it is precisely about that exact thing, about how it's never enough. And I mentioned in the book, I said, well, let me just start by saying this. Like, we live in a world today of unprecedented prosperity.
Crazy.
Right? Like never before in the history of mankind have so many people been granted access to education, financial opportunities, entertainment, comfort,
Food.
leisure,
Look at
food,
the food.
exactly. And yet, like I said, virtually every study shows that we are more unhappy than ever. And I believe the reason being, we have reached through this technological age and through all these blessings that we have reached the top of what has been for generations. People said that's the top of the mountain. And we've reached it, and we've discovered that there's nothing there.
There's nothing at the top of that mountain.
And ours is the generation that is waking up to this realization. And so there is, like I said, under the surface, there is this depression, this confusion, even this building rage. And it's because we've reached the top our whole lives. Actually, we can go back to biblical times. Actually, it's like they pointed that if we could just reach the top of that financial mountain, we would have peace, right? If we could just reach the top of that sexual mountain, we'll have peace.
I love watching The Chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And I love they're walking through the lands with no food at all. Like they're trying to feed hundreds of people with a couple pieces of fish.
Yeah.
And yet they never are afraid.
Yeah.
They never are afraid if there's going to be enough food to eat.
Right.
And so the Lord's Prayer says, give us this day our daily bread.
Yeah.
It doesn't say, give me enough bread to last the rest of my lifetime.
Right.
Just give me enough bread for today.
Yeah.
That's the prayer. And then so my prayer now to fulfill this significance is every morning I'm asking God to guide me.
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, I've tried it. I've tried my mountain.
Yeah.
And when I got there, I just found that I was craving more and more and more, and it was never going to end. Yeah. Now I'm asking you, guide me, show me what to do today. Yeah. Because when I follow what he's telling me to do, I'm always joyful.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's no greater sense of security than in the awareness of what he has done for us. Right. Of significance, I should say. How I think of the passage that says, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Here we are, like a dreadful mess, a nightmare of bitterness and anger and war and confusion and yet God lavishes his love upon us. I mean, there is no greater sense of significance in my mind than just that awareness.
Well said. We're at the final craving.
Yeah.
My favorite craving.
Yeah.
This is a craving for innocence.
Yeah.
And I was raised in a family line of deep shame.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that I was already innocent. Can you describe what this means to you, this craving for innocence?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I mentioned the first four: security, identity, independence, significance. You will find those in every psychological textbook ever written. Independent, that had never been brought together as far as I'm aware, like I've brought them together. And of course, I have reassigned them. I do not believe these are psychological cravings. These are cravings of the soul. They are non-biological. They are underneath. And then you have innocence, which is second to none. I mean, when you think of it, basically every argument we have ever had is predicated on my feeling that you have somehow suggested I am guilty of wrongdoing or wrong thinking. Whether it's the sock on the floor, or I didn't wash the dishes, or I didn't get to work on time, or I didn't meet someone's perceived expectation, it is like, touching that innocence nerve, right? And basically every argument we've ever had has been us inappropriately responding to that. When the innocence craving is properly aligned and properly managed, it's what propels us into peaceful living with each other. It's what inspires me to want to apologize to you when I know I've done something wrong. It's what makes me want to live in right relationship with my neighbor and my maker, right? It's a beautiful craving given to us for a very good purpose. But of course, when it's inappropriately used, it's like the same as significance. Rather than having that craving satisfied by doing right or being right, I satisfy it by claiming that you are worse. And when we think of cancel culture today, or what they call cancel culture, it is all based on this craving for innocence, because we not only want to believe that we are not guilty. So innocence is more than believing we are not guilty. ultimately it wants to crescendo in a feeling of righteousness. I am so innocent that I am righteous, right? And so we have this metric at play, and we have these levels of righteousness that we're all. I mean, I often say there's a large part of the world that they're non-religious today, or they claim to be. Really, they've just started a new religion, but they may kind of push aside at the idea of God, but they have not lost their fervor to feel righteous, to judge people who they believe to be sinners, right? And to sit on the top of that pile, right? And so the craving for innocence is a good craving. It propels us into wanting to live right with each other and right with our maker. But the problem is it's oftentimes mismanaged, right? And it's the cause of almost every fight amongst us, right? Where, because you've said something that's made me feel guilty, I can't feel guilty because my soul needs to feel innocent, right? And so if I don't feel like I actually am innocent, and the truth of us, most of us aren't, then my way to manage that is to make sure I can see you as more guilty. Because then
None of us are. None of
yeah,
us
exactly.
are innocent.
Yeah.
And yet, my favorite. So I did a lot of work on this, and Byron Katie has this 4-question sequence she takes people through, which is judge your neighbor. She calls it a judge your neighbor worksheet. And to understand how I was judging other people with my own guilt, that this craving for innocence was causing me to judge other people. I started to pull out those worksheets every time I judge somebody. And her method is your judgment true? And, of course you're thinking of, yeah, it's true. A person is a jerk. But then her next question is, can you absolutely know your judgment's true? And it's very, very rare you can absolutely know anything other than what's in your own mind.
Yeah.
And so she starts to create a little bit of space between your judgment being maybe not all of reality. And at the end, she has you turn the judgment around and see how you yourself have been or are being the exact thing you're judging in someone else. So if my judgment is this person's a jerk, the turnaround would be I'm being a jerk.
Right.
And then she asks you to, answer how are you the thing you're judging? And it's obvious. Well, if I'm calling someone names in my mind, that's what a jerk would do.
Yeah.
And then another turnaround is that person's not a jerk. And when we're so caught up in our judgment of this, they made me feel guilty and now I need to make them more guilty than me. It's really difficult for us to look at their innocence.
Right.
But if we look at that other turnaround of they're not a jerk, we can see, well, there's somebody's son.
Yeah.
There's somebody's husband. There's somebody's father. I'm sure there's many situations in their life where they're really kind and loving and caring and they might take care of a lot of people and do a lot of nice things. Maybe they're not always a jerk. Right. And so that question sequence really helped me get to the other side of these judgments and stop trying to pin blame on everyone.
Well, and for me, of course, as a person of faith, and the book's title, of course, is The Magnetic Heart of God, Understanding the 5 Cravings of Your Soul. The reason it's called The Magnetic Heart of God, because I believe that in the end, these are non-biological cravings that can only be fully satisfied in the divine. And so for me, as you mentioned, we're all guilty at some level, and probably a much higher level than we think of ourselves, because our innocence craving doesn't allow us to see ourselves truly. And yet, I have a God who loves me, and through my relationship with him declares me innocent. Right. And that is how I can manage this craving, is by continually giving it to my maker.
That's beautiful. Man, Cory, I have just absolutely loved going into these 5 cravings. Yeah, I cannot wait for this book release. I know it's coming out in December, right?
Yes, sir.
How can people reach out to you and learn more?
Yeah, the best place is at myname.com, CoryRosenke.com. That would allow you to connect with me there. And of course, also as you can see over my shoulder here, I do have a few promotional copies of my book available now. It won't be available in stores until December, but heck, for the first 2 people that want to contact me over over from my website there. I'll send you a free book right now. I do have a few copies. Yeah, just reach out to me over CoryRosenke.com and go to contact me. And that'll also send you to my Facebook page, Cory Rosenke Ministries. I started Twitter, which is a little bit awkward. I'm not sure about that thing yet, but that's C Rosenke. But definitely CoryRosenke.com is the best place to learn about me. Or if you just search the Magnetic Heart of God, it'll also guide you to me.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so glad we were guided to have this conversation together today. And thank you for listening this week, and we'll see you guys next week.